Perfect. Yay! Languages may be helping someone, who knows. Welcome, everyone. Definitely got quite a few people in up front. So we'll see. Hello, Ricky Kitty. Hello, Roy. I'll just go through a few reminders about the basics and the rules in this particular workshop. Good evening, Explorer. Sorry to hear Poppy's unwell. Good for you to be here. Valkyra, hello from Reykjavik, Iceland. 2 of us here. Wow, amazing. Welcome, welcome. Let me remind you of some basics. Please be dressed. Wear some clothes. I don't want to see any of your bits. I'm sure you have beautiful bits. I just don't want to see them. I don't care if they're big, large, damp. I don't give a flying fuck. I'm sure they're wonderful. I just don't want to see them. So please keep your bits to yourself. Please don't comment about anybody else in the room, including me. I go bright red at the moment. I'm a shit ton of drugs that stop me from getting cancer, and they make me really go bright red because I'm apparently in the menopause. And somebody mentioned it last week. Just don't mention about other people's shit. We don't have to. We're here to discuss, learn, and everything else as well. If you've got anything to say, please write it down the side. I try really hard to catch everything. Sometimes I come slightly off topic to answer a question, and then I bring it back as quickly as I can. And I try not to miss what anyone else is saying or doing. These are being recorded. Please be aware that they're being recorded. So if you want to change the look of you or who you are or anything else as well, please do so, or let me know, or Jerry know.
Yeah.
Hello, Jim. Nice to see you. Greetings from Cornwall. So, is that you I can hear, Jerry? Were you going to say something?
I just said yeah.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, ask us.
Sorry.
So, again, just to reiterate those rules. Hi, Cosmopolite. I will reply to you. They were good suggestions, by the way, just so you know. If you want to say anything, don't bother raising your hand. Just write it down the side. You're quite welcome to, because I don't unmute anybody, because it's quite interesting what happens. I find people take over, and I don't know what happens. It's quite interesting. So if you want to say anything, please type it down the side. That's where we'll go. Again, so respectful to everybody else, be kind, be considerate, don't mention anybody's looks or that you want to meet them, and please don't take any of your clothes off or anything else as well. Hi, Verity from Arizona, USA. Nice to meet you, nice to see you. As I said, so please be respectful, please be kind. Hello from Manitoba, Canada. Gosh, we've got a real mix in today. I was doing the Master Slave World Conference last Sunday. I did 3 workshops back to back of an hour and a half each. I should do better, shouldn't I? I should learn better than not to put this. It was really cool. It's really lovely because you do get people from all around the world, and I think that's really amazing. So a few extra people joining in. If Jerry sees anyone misbehaving, they'll be straight out and they'll be banned. And that we have had actual wankers. Seriously, we've had, is it 3 or 4 masturbators, Jerry?
Oh, at least, yeah.
Is it, I mean,
over the years we've been doing this.
Yeah, I mean, you know, good for you if that's what you want to do, but just don't do it. Just not.
People think there's nothing slightly erotic about these workshops. It's not like anything to wank to.
Well, I mean, there's my beautiful face. There's your beautiful. There's people do. No, it's not that, is it? It's people just want to expose themselves, and they think this is an okay space to do it, and it is not. You will be chucked out as soon as possible. Hello, Kex from Vienna, Austria. Hello, and hello, Ms. Joy from Greetings and Salutations from New York. Is there an option for CC? What do you mean CC? What does that mean? Sorry, you'd have to tell me what that means.
Closed captions, but if so, no.
No, apparently not. I don't know. Sorry, not very technical.
I think so. I can check that actually while you're talking.
Okay, thank you. Master Jim, I had that unfortunate experience last night. Idiots. I'm sorry to hear that, Leather Lioness. It does happen all too often. People are so willing. I'm writing a couple of writings at the moment. One on self-advocacy, responsibility and accountability, which is quite interesting in the scene. And another one I'm thinking of doing is kind of like that consideration, that people are so self-obsessed and we just consider ourselves and our wants and needs. And yet there are so many greater considerations, the other person. And I think it really goes hand in hand with consent, consideration of self, of others, of the scene, of society, of culture, of many things. I think it makes a real difference. And I think we have to think about it with this. I'm just going to do a perfect segue. Don't knock it. Don't knock it. And I think it's really important about this as well when we start talking about mind fucks. we have to consider, what do we want on it? What does it mean? And how do we work with it? And I really want to bring that together here. Your writings on FetLife are so spot on. Oh, thank you. That's very kind. They are very strong, very opinionated, and I don't care. I will say what I've got to say about our world, and it's not always popular, and I will keep saying it. Okay, so let's talk about mindfucks. Mindfucks are interesting, aren't they? What do I mean by them? So I might hit humiliation in this, clearly going to hit a bit of consent, going to hit many things. First of all, let me state that mindfucks are edge play. They really are, for some people, some of the time. For some people, they might not see it that way, but they might not know what's happening, and others can cause long-term damage and all sorts of things. So let's look at the principle of mindfucks and where it came from and why. So when you look up the history or the philosophy or the research on mindfucks, they come under 4 definitions, and that is people fucking with other people's idea of reality, and that can happen through disinformation, so like fake news, pranks, and amusement. You know, it's a laugh, I did it, it doesn't matter that they believe it. I said edge play, definitely not age play. Could you do an age play mindfuck? Yeah, of course you could, but all in, it's definitely edge play. It could also be fucking with people's sense of reality while they're under the influence, and that's coming a lot. So mindfuck psychology and mindfuck drug use was a big thing, especially when we're looking back over time. And then being mindfucked when you're under the influence of alcohol or under the influence, especially of psychedelics, and that's not normally anything to do with malicious intent of any way, shape, or form. And then it's also to do with something that really messes with your mind, like a piece of news or a movie twist, a plot twist, or something that happens and you go, wow. So we're going to look at a couple of those, not all of them, because we're talking about another version of that, which is trying to play with somebody's mind and their fear in order to create a thrilling or tense situation for people, or in order to play with their mind, maybe to gain power, maybe to make them think differently, or to give them a really good time and for pleasure. As in mindfucks, what about dreams? Yeah, I think dreams play with our reality, but I don't know if they fuck up our mind. I think we can be impacted by them. I think our dreams can mess with our mind, but often we can find an interpretation about our dreams because it's about our subconscious trying to work through something. So if we can look at interpretations, it's less of a mindfuck than we actually think. So people have played with people's minds for years and years and years. When you go back to Discordianism in the 60s, actually, if you look at that, there are some people might not like this, but that there were a lot of pranksters in Discordianism and a lot of people who wanted to change the way people thought. So they would write things, and there was a lot of history about the Illuminati and spreading conspiracy theories that started in the 60s, which is interesting. So Discordians were trying to elevate this to a really high level of messages, but actually what they were trying to do in some way, shape, or form was to mess with people's sense of reality, so that people became more skeptical about what was going on in the news and everything else as well. But actually, it did the opposite. It just made people believe it, and it had a really different impact. And that's why we've got to be careful. We've got to be really careful about what we do with a mindfuck. And then there are novels that came from that, all sorts of things as well. So it's all about, a mindfuck is really about manipulation, disinformation, or playing those games. Somebody privately said, I mindfucked the crew at the end of MSC, nothing serious, just using an inside joke in good fun. Yeah, and that can be good fun as well, can't it? So we can do things, but I'm going to come on to that, because actually, although that's great, it also really matters. And I will honestly say why it really matters. So we can do things really in a dark way. We can do things very nasty. Cambridge Analytica, different people in the UK, in the US, how we try to impact the world and what we do. And we can also do it for fun, for different reasons. It's all about intent, isn't it? When we look at conspiracy theories and how they work, the occult, or different things. However, the best mindfuck, the one that plays with you most, or me most, or everybody, is all about fear, our paranoia, our worries, the things that we're the most careful about. It can play on mental health. It can play on weak reasoning. It can play on hatred of other people. So if we've got racism, anti-Semitism, anti-misogyny, misandry, all of those things. And that can be a really big thing. I use Tantra for mindfucks, and it has been such a great experience for both myself and my partners, which is really cool. It can be wonderful. I think as well, where I'm going to go with this is it's also about intent. So we might mean to do something funny like that, and we might mean to do something good. But even if we mean to do something good and well, and we think we know something, there is always the possibility for it to go horribly wrong if somebody's in a certain state of mind. So that's why we have to be really careful. It's easy to play about with drugs and influence people's thoughts, their patterns, their behaviors. But it's also easy if they are having issues with their mental health or not feeling particularly well or had a very stressful day. When we play with our own drugs, we've then got dickish behavior coming in, haven't we? We don't need to do that. However, for some people who are people collectors for the wrong reasons, a mindfuck is just wonderful. Somebody wants to make you their slave. Now, I don't mean in a consensual way. I mean people who run cults, people who run organizations who want you to believe certain things. And that's a lot of power that they really enjoy. They'll often target people who come from less supportive families, who have mental health issues, who have some form of trauma, somebody who has some form of avoidant or anxious or chaotic attachment pattern or style, who don't have a lot of friends and family around them, and especially if that person is looking for somebody else to save them, especially a strong male figure. Most mindfuckers and cult leaders are men, not all the time. I totally appreciate that, and we really have to be careful because that mindfucking grooms victims and uses people in a really negative way. So I'm just talking about the negativity a little bit, and that's brainwashing. However, it only works if the victim buys into it. I'm going to come on to that one as well when we start talking about mental health, Dickon. So thank you. Definitely will be covering that one as well. So mindfucking techniques are used for interrogation, they're acts of war, like they're mind control, and they're part of torture. So we're talking about some really serious, heavy shit here. We're not talking about, oh, I know, I'll just do this, it'll be a laugh. There were plenty of Nazi experimentations on Jewish prisoners, especially with mescaline at the time, like lots of drugs and different things to try and break all their mental defenses, just to try and see who would break, what would happen, to break their identity, to break their culture, to break everything else as well. And lots of occult teachers and lots of cult teachers have used it over the years as well. Training groups, asking groups to kill themselves. So why am I being a bit serious to start off with? Because it's fucking huge. A lot of the things we talk about, we get so used to talking about them, we take them very lightly. And we say that it's not that bad, it's okay, we can do this. It doesn't matter. And you might have good and you might have bad intentions. And actually somebody might really want to turn around and heal you. When you look at some of the original testing with psychedelics of Roque, Roque was connected to the Mexican intelligence service, but he was also experimenting with people who had very serious mental health disorders, like disassociation, like different things, to try and help them. So, however, he was a psychedelic healer as such, but his methods were just, if I break your ego defense and if I break who you are, all in the name of healing, I will make you better. And we have to watch that as well, because we talk about breaking a slave in order to rebuild, and that sounds hot as fuck. Somebody with a completely broken psychology isn't that easy to rebuild, and they don't get rebuilt by somebody else. They have to do the rebuilding. If we have learned to disassociate, if we have learned to split in any of our personalities, if we've learned to do different things in order to heal. I was talking to one of my clients who has dissociative identity disorder earlier, and we were talking about her alters and different people that she has. And if I talk about anyone, by the way, I have absolutely expressed permission to talk about them. And what we were saying is, rather than these are coping mechanisms, we were saying actually these are awesome parts, human beings that are part of her, that were born like Phoenix in the fire in order to save her and to do the sadness and to do the anger and to do the different things that she couldn't learn to do when she was little. And that is very important, but that comes from something that was hurt and broken. So we can say a lot of stuff in the name of healing, in the name of repair, in the name of goodness, but it doesn't always come out well. So We can have good and bad intentions. However, what we're talking about is power, and power can be used and misused. Hello, Andy, nice to see you too. Literally running through the door and put it on. I really appreciate that. Very sweet. Appreciate your support. Thanks for coming on. So you can train yourself in defense. You can look at different mindfuck techniques and anti-mindfuck techniques. When we look at mindfuck techniques, the basic things we're talking about are isolation. So if we isolate somebody as much as we can, then they are more likely to be a victim, or it's more likely, so we're talking about the more extreme things. Now, clearly the anti-mindfuck technique, the solution to that is to have a wonderful group of friends and keep people near to you. If you make someone reliant on you for their self-esteem, then again, we're much more likely to be able to mindfuck them. Whereas if we don't rely on anybody else, or we rely on a few people or ourselves for our self-esteem, then it's much harder to get into our heads. And if we get somebody to repeat our dogma, to repeat our messages, to say how it is, and these can be mantras and different things, that can be really effective as a form of mindfuck technique. However, if we choose not to repeat that dogma, then that's completely different. And again, we've got to be careful. So you might have mantras and techniques that you want to use to help mindfuck somebody. And if it's something really negative about that person, again, I'm going to come into the sort of person we should and shouldn't be playing with around this in a minute. We can deprive someone of food and sleep with water tortures as well. So that's incredible, isn't it? It had such a big, you've got Japanese prisoners of war from the past. Some of these were really, really used, and they're still used today. People talk about Guantanamo Bay, all sorts of different places where isolation is used, lack of sleep is used, depriving of food, giving food, making friends. So us looking after ourselves and sleeping and eating well makes our brains less vulnerable to this. It makes a difference as well. If we give the impression that we know more, that we are somehow more spiritually enlightened and that we are better than the other person, that somehow we have some power, we get them, maybe we've got empathy and different things, that's going to make it a lot easier to mindfuck somebody. So it's really important that we need to see humans as humans. If you buy into that master, mistress, mummy, daddy is the supreme being, above all else, you are giving them the capacity to mindfuck you. Now, if you want that, that's fucking awesome and wonderful. If you don't want it, that's also giving them a shit ton of power. So we need to make sure to remember that human beings are human beings, that nobody is perfect, that actually decent dominants and decent daddies and decent mummies and decent dominatrixes and dominates and everybody else, they are people who have vulnerabilities, who have problems. Wicked Kitty, mindfuck is one of my number one favourite things. I'm super glad you brought this up. I keep getting myself in sticky situations. I think if we like it, we look for it, and I think if we like it, we almost do it to ourselves. We are some of the best people at doing this shit to ourselves. So hopefully if you play this back again and again, you can or maybe I'll try and write about it as well. But I know Compassion Sadist wrote quite a lot about mindfucks last year or this year at some point as well. But, I'm adding quite a lot to that on top of what he said, I think. We can also keep a victim if we want this person to be a victim in a slightly altered state or an altered sense of reality. And we can do that with hypnotism, and we can do that with drugs. Now, of course, we can drug people against their consent. We can't hypnotize without their consent as such, but we can influence people's thinkings, and that makes a difference as well. So don't take the drugs. Make sure we speak to other people. Again, really makes a huge difference. If we gaslight somebody, in other words, if we make them think that abusive behavior is their fault or for their own good, that's going to have a massive, massive impact as well. So I think we've got to be really careful about what people in power do. So it's blowing up in San Francisco at the moment. If you're part of the American theme, there's a particular person that's blowing up, which I did say about 3 or 4 months ago would, even a couple of years ago. There is always a person of power on the scene who often then turns out, sadly, to be somebody who is abusing or mindfucking or doing things to certain people at certain times. And it does happen an awful lot. So we've got to be really careful, which is why I have a little bit of an issue with mentoring, if mentoring also means having sex. If you have a teacher, if you have a psychotherapist, if you have a counsellor, if you have a therapist, if you're a doctor or anybody who has a position of power around you wants to have sex with you or influence you in some way, there is already a power imbalance, and that is never a good idea. I know it's a wonderful fantasy, but in reality, there is a power imbalance, and even age can come into that as well. I'm not saying all age gap relationships are negative by far. What I'm saying is, if we give somebody who is older or different to us more power, then that's going to look at our capacity to be able to decide and look after ourselves. And anybody who wants to mindfuck somebody else is absolutely going to have their sense of autonomy destroyed by that person. You are sovereign in what you believe. You are the human being that says, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent, was something that Eleanor Roosevelt said. The problem is if you already believe some of this stuff, then you're more likely to believe some of this stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, all of these things can be used very sexily as well, hence why I'm saying them. But I'm looking at giving you the ways, and I'm looking at also saying, hey, we need to be a bit careful about the way that we use these. So we need to also understand that we have control over what we agree to, what we consent to. There isn't one right way, there isn't one true way, there isn't a brilliant dom. Not all submissives do, not all doms do, not all mummies or daddies or tops or bottoms do. It's all bollocks. We're all human beings at the end of the day, and we really have to be careful about that. People can use very clever, cheap tricks to try and trick other people. That's a very good way to mindfuck people. It could be superstitions, it could be knowing something's going to happen. And if somebody's in a desperate state or in a prison cell or being kept for long enough and are really tired, they're desperate to believe in that magic, that aspect. So we need critical reasoning because people are just fucking bollocks and full of shit a lot of the time as well. If you haven't met me before, I say how it is, and I swear a lot as well, so sorry if you're offended. Also, people might use things like, are you all in? Are you really committed? Do you really mean this? Are you everything you say you are? I'm everything I said I'm going to be. Are you promising me the same? Because I'm not feeling it. So we have to be really careful of that. We wouldn't ask for total obedience from somebody if it goes against their wellness. Would we like maybe to have a submissive who would go to walk off the end of the pier if we said walk off the end of the pier? Maybe we would. I don't know if that's healthy. I think some autonomy, even in a full power exchange relationship, is healthy. Because what if the dominant has a mental breakdown? What if the dominant has a physical breakdown, an emotional breakdown? What if the dominant isn't well and can't lead some of these things? I think one of the things we have to teach a submissive is do think for yourself if I'm doing anything that isn't good for you. What if that dominant is on a set of drugs at the moment and they're not adjusting to the one and it makes them violent or aggressive or causes issues? What if that dominant has to go away for months on end because something happened in the family? What if that dominant is really ill and has cancer or has dementia or Alzheimer's or anything along those lines, or as Phil says, or has an accident or something happens? We have to have that capacity that says, you are my most precious being. It is your job to look after yourself and me. There you go, Jen. Protocol number 1, protect the property. And that's what I've just said. So our major job here is to protect you and to protect me and us. And that isn't done by blind, absolute, total obedience. It's actually ironically done by choice. And it's much more effective to be done by choice. That's more of a mind fuck than anything. We can fuck someone up so they do what we say. Okay, that's possible. Wouldn't it be better that somebody really wants to do what they're going to say and has a very different feeling around that? That matters. Somebody who wants to mindfuck somebody else is also definitely going to identify the victim in this case. Again, we can use some of these things positively as well. Their pressure points, their ouches, their bruises, their soreness. What is their wound? What is their problem? What is their attachment? What hurts them? What's their self-confidence like? What's their ego like? What's their narcissism like? Because we all have narcissism in some way, shape or form. What is their wound and how do I get in there and dig it out of it? Well, then we've got to be aware of our own flaws. We've got to be aware of our own wounds, our biases. Because if we understand that, which is what I'm also talking about in that writing, which is going to be about accountability, if we are aware of our wounds and our hurts and our damage, we are less susceptible to manipulation. Now, we might want manipulation from somebody, and that's completely different. It's very consensual. Sometimes be careful what you wish for, because some of this shit isn't always healthy either. Also watch somebody when somebody turns around and says, I am your family, I'm your protector, I'm the one who's going to look after you, you are my number one. They take that position of hierarchical family. Now, again, really positive in power-exchange relationships at times, but also be really careful, because as a victim, we are often looking for the perfect family, the saviour, the one that's going to save us, protect us and defend us. So we have to be really careful of that as well. And if you work in any of those things, you've got to be really careful, because mindfuck is dangerous. So mindfucker is all of those things. There are a few ideas about how you actually do that, how a predator is going to look to mindfuck a victim, and there were some solutions there just for the first half hour on how you then would sort that. What does a mindfuck actually mean? So far, those who claim to be my family definitely were not. The lioness said, and Andy said yes, because are ultimately ulterior motives by saying I'm your protector. The thing is, I think people do claim to be family. I think people can be family. The question is for how long? And the question is, what does that mean, and at what level? So often what happens, gosh, I remember my ex-husband standing up at our wedding saying that he would take a bullet for me, no matter what. I think he'd rather shoot me nowadays. I think the bullet has changed direction in a completely different way, and he would just step out of the way and just let it go straight through my heart. Because things change. And I think we have to be aware of that. Is everything forever? Over 50% of relationships break up. Are our exchange relationships any different? No, they're not. I think what we have to think about is, rather than ultimately owning and belonging, is custodianship, being a custodian for somebody. I used to live in this beautiful 15th century house that was stunning. It was, I mean, very expensive as well. I absolutely realised my privilege. You know, so much history in this house, and I felt like a custodian. There was an actual dig out where people had hidden from Cromwell who came to the house. It's so full of English history. So I think as tops, I think we're looking at custodianship, which is similar to ownership, but there's the admission that things go wrong and we need to go through. So I think that's a slightly different way of looking at it, but not everyone would agree with me. Jim said, is that not the same with community? Completely. Look, I'm part of Lamb, and we talk about being Lamely, but then people leave, they're not Lamely anymore, they're not family. I'm a huge part of Cheer. And we talk about being family, and then someone leaves, they're not part of the family anymore. Lots of these situations that we're in are transitory. That's why I prefer custodian. Really, that's honestly my favourite word instead of forever and all those promises. A direct message. I'm really struggling with understanding how altered my mental state was when I was in a TP submissive role. A lot of it feels like a mindfuck, but there were plenty of healthy practices. I'm more confused by what was okay with me. I would totally agree with that statement. We have to look at, why did I do that? What is in my circle of power that I can, or circle of influence that I control and make a difference with, and how that's going to work. And as I said earlier, we are the worst ones. We do our worst mindfucks on ourselves than anybody else. And that isn't spoken about a lot either. It's not. So we have to be careful. I've made a request of new partners to never make any promises to me, because I can't stand it when it's not honoured. And I think the problem is, when people start to love or have new relationship energy, we're totally in. New relationship energy is one of the biggest mindfucks you can ever experience, let alone from anybody else. Because it's all that passion, isn't it? It's all that intensity with those emotions that are designed to bring you in and hold you in and make a difference. So I don't think people can say forever, which is why I like the word custodian. At this moment, this is what I promise in the here and now, for now, until. But you know, the average person spends 2 years thinking about leaving a relationship before they actually even do anything. Andy says, I spoke with my ex-wife today who said she's doing a play called How to Murder Your Husband. I thought, good job, I'm your ex, isn't it? Shadow says, self-sabotage is huge. Yeah, it is, and we need to do that. But see, and Coca says, I hate the promise. And Linus, you said, if you're totally in, you need to honour what you say. I think people do mean what they say and want to honour what they say at that time. We live in a different world where actually, again, that's why I prefer the word custodian, whereas this is about now. I really do promise you this now, and I really do mean it. But I don't think we mean that we will promise it tomorrow or the next day or the next day. And if it's very sexually charged and very exciting, then we are more likely to make bigger promises because we want this situation to happen and move forward. So again, very careful about that sort of thing. Even the word moves with trust and promises only. Yeah, they can't promise forever, let alone tomorrow. Yes, some people can. And I think, as Mistress Rose says, we have this it goes back to my writing on expectations. We have these expectations and we think people will live up to them because I would. But then that goes back to another writing I've got on double standards because, yeah, have I promised and made those said things at times? I've made promises I haven't kept, but I don't know many people who haven't. Not all in. And they might be really tiny promises, they might be really small things that we say, however, they have a huge impact on other people. And that in itself is a mindfuck. Unbalancing your expectations, yeah, I agree. A lot of people aren't aware of the implications of promises they make, yeah. Level line is great, but when the promises will always come back to talk it out and they don't, that's fucking heartbreaking. Is it heartbreaking, or do we need to accept that that's an absolute? I think we will always, I definitely will, is really nice, and I think that's a really good intent. You don't have to prove it every day. For me, when a promise is made, it's not about a promise that is then kept forever. I'm a big believer in custodianship and a renewal of those promises every day. And then we have to look at, why do I believe that? Why am I buying into that? What's going on for me? We need to accept and move on to the next right day. Not as easy, not as much easier said than done. It's not. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about fear. So if we're talking about a mindfuck and how that works for somebody, what we're playing with is somebody's expectations and somebody's perceptions of their reality. There are many ways that we can do it. It's really important to have a look at what we do. So fear might be a very deep, wide reaction to many things because it's actually something that we're hardwired with to protect us, to keep us alive. So fear in itself is really important. It's very different to anxiety and stress and different things, and it's fundamental. It's really important. It might be that we go, oh, it might be that we jump at something. It might be that we flinch, and they can be learned habits as well. But the circuitry of the brain is interesting when it comes to this. So some of the main chemicals that we have that really help us when we're scared are also really important when we're happy and when we're excited. So we're in a highly aroused state. Now we talk about fight or flight, but actually there's fight, flight, freeze, friend, fuck, block, bow, and fall. There are many quite interesting reactions to this, which is why with a mind fuck, we have to be careful that is that person fucking because of a trauma response? Is that person fawning and doing all of those things as a trauma response? And also, I often say to cheerleaders who are very, very scared, they're like, oh my God, I'm so scared, it's all going to go horribly wrong. That's the same physiological state that we have is the same as excitement. So we've developed this technique that we talk about, turn your t-shirt inside out, and the kids know exactly what we mean. Because what they're wearing is they're wearing the t-shirt, which is showing red, which is I'm scared. They need to change it, put it back on, showing pink, which means I'm excited. And you'll be really surprised at how that plays with their brains, because it's the same physiological feelings, just worn inside out. So fear is really all-encompassing and all-powerful. It can make us get a rush. It can make us feel terrorized. It can make all sorts of different things. Fear is everything to do with context, the context that we're in, when our thinking brain gives emotional feedback. So if we perceive ourselves to be in a very safe space, we might become highly aroused, and that fear actually can become enjoyment and excitement. If we are in a state that doesn't feel particularly protected or we're not sure about, then we're more likely to feel fear. And that's really important to think about when you want to create a mindfuck, and that is environment. So the environment really matters for the mindfuck. What am I going to do here? What would this look like? How would we work with this? Is this a safe space? Are we in a different space? Can we have more of an impact on somebody? And often involving others can make a real difference, or different noises, different temperatures, different rooms, different houses, different dungeons, different places. So we have to go somewhere else sometimes. If you have a perception, like when you go to the ghost house, or so quite near me, there's Tully's Farm when it's Halloween. And Tully's Farm is quite well known in the UK. Not everybody always knows about it, but it's got some really incredible hay rides, and it's got this huge corn maze type run where lots of people are coming up you with just really scary things. Now your brain's already thinking something scary is going to happen because you know you're going there to be frightened. There's this really interesting maze that's just full of, it's all white with big butcher's curtains and just full of clowns. Now clowns might be fine for lots of people, but for others, absolutely terrifying. Your brain does that. So your brain needs to understand that if I'm being chased down a dark alley, that's dangerous. But if I'm in this situation where I want to be scared, that it's not dangerous, I'm just thrilled. So how does your brain do that? When your body is trying to spread the message of fight, flight, freeze, friend, fuck, block, plumb, and fawn, it starts in the amygdala, which is kind of through here and through here. It's like a wishbone shape that comes round and then comes down. It's an almond shape of nuclei, little shapes that it's in the temporal lobe of the brain. And that is all about reacting and learning about stimulus. So it activates whenever we see somebody. So like if I look around and I see Jerry, Jerry is a friend. I've known Jerry for quite a while. I've known Zoe for quite a while. I've known Emily for quite a while. I've known Andy, and I've met some of these people. These are faces that I can see. So I'm picking on faces. Dickon I've met as well. So it's something might stand out for us. We're looking for this. So we're looking to see in these faces familiarity, fear, or different things. And that's influenced by lots of different things that we've experienced in our lives. You look a bit like that weirdo. You look a bit like that. You look a bit like, oh, this happened. That puts us on edge and it changes things. So that threat stimulus could come from a face. It could come from a look. It can come from a sound. It can come from anything that's quite triggering to us. And by triggering, I mean something that we've experienced before in the past. So a threat stimulus. That fear response in the amygdala activates the functions in our brain that are the motor functions to prepare us to do something, even if that's keeping really still. So our sympathetic nervous system ramps up and all of our stress hormones turn on. And at that moment, we get lots of body changes. So your brain becomes hyper alert, your pupils will dilate. It's always a good thing to look for if you want to play a game with somebody like this. Your bronchi dilate and your breathing accelerates. Your heart rate changes, your blood pressure rises. So again, it's interesting, isn't it? Let's look at all those medical things that can influence this. If you've got somebody who truly believes they're in danger, and let's say they have psychosis, is it a good idea to give them an alternative state? 100% not. If somebody has really high blood pressure and has just drank a licorice tea, and then you make them really fucking frightened, is that a good idea? No. Their blood pressure is going to go through the roof. That might be thrilling, but it might also be really complex for somebody with hypertension or problems who's on tablets. You have to understand somebody's mental, emotional, drug, medical state in order to play these games. Andy says, a while back I did a scene which put uncertainty in fear, and then my partner was tied up and blindfolded. I put cheese oil on my finger, made my partner lock it in, and then said that's maybe going somewhere else. I had no intention of putting cheese oil in any different parts, but the mindfuck was amazing. But obviously I feel once you've done it, you can't do it again. You can use different things. So like if you don't want to use cheese oil, you can use things like ginger, you can freeze knives, you can use capsicum, you can use anything that has heat in it to create interesting. You can use Ralgex, heat, cold, you can use lots of things. But again, it's all about discussing and planning. Like, for example, if you use ice to make it feel like a blade, or somebody's frozen something, if somebody has rosacea in their face and you hold it to their face, they're going to get a massive rash on the side of their face. So again, it's about all of these things. It's about understanding somebody's medical conditions, skin conditions, their psychological conditions before you play with this sort of shit. And I use curd in what way? As for heat, or yeah, we can use different things in different ways. We can also use syrups and warm syrups to feel like blood is running. If we run a knife on someone, if it's not a knife, there are lots of mindfucks that we can do, but we'll cover those when we get time at the end. So also we've got to remember in this stage, your organs that aren't really particularly vital will also all slow down. Your stomach, your gastrointestinal system, all of those. What do you recommend for a new dynamic where you want to explore humiliation and gaslighting but don't want to do harm? I'll come to that one in a minute. I promise I will have a look at that. So your hippocampus, another part of the brain, is really closely associated to the amygdala. That and the prefrontal cortex really help us work out what is truly a threat here and what isn't. So we have to really understand that people aren't stupid. We might have an instant response, but then we use a different part of our brain to try and counter that response. So when we're playing with the brain, we need to understand, like, for example, if you're out in I watched a video thing, was it a TikTok? I don't know, whatever it was yesterday, where, you know, someone was just saying, keep still, keep still. They were on some kind of safari, and this huge fucking great big jaguar or whatever it was came over and was sniffing in the van and had its paw on the person's foot. And they're just saying, keep still. Fucking hell, the fear and the perception of that must have been huge. Of, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. Or if you see a snake or something, we're all saying, keep still, don't do this, be careful about that. We have a lot of responses to those things. So we have to be really careful. However, we might also know that there is a person there with a gun. We might know that there is a person there and they can slap down a cage. We might know that somebody's there who can knock out or have a knockout dart or something. So we have more of a perception of what is really here. So our thinking circuitry reassures our emotional circuitry and that we can calm down. So when we want to play with people's feelings and emotions, sometimes we have to sidetrack their thinking circuitry. It might be that we play something in one ear that they have to listen to and learn to repeat. So it might be that you're playing part of a book or a times table they've got to repeat, but at the same time you're creating fear in the other ear, so you're playing with both parts of the brain at the same time. It might be that you put a tape system in where you're playing with surround sound, people walking in and different things coming. So I'm new to ethical non-monogamy poly. Can you please share some tips for management and balance? Not today. I've got lots of writings on that. Today is absolutely about the mind fuck. And another day on that, definitely. And I've got writings that cover a lot of that. So today is a very specific topic, but stick around in a few weeks, we might end up covering that. So we might have fear responses, but our logical brain really knows that we're okay. You could argue that about poly, actually. How are we? How safe are we? Honestly, read a lot of books, do a lot of things. I would say this really facetiously, don't come and see me, I'm really busy. Go and see somebody like me, a really good experienced therapist or life coach who can help you with your specific problems through it. Make sure you know your attachment patterns, make sure you know who you are and how you are, because jealousy will come up, things will come up, and it's really complex to try and work your way through. So that is as much as I'll say on that topic today. We also learn fear through personal experience. So when we're talking to somebody about a mindfuck, we need to understand what their personal experience is. How have you been frightened? What's happened to you? I have a white long-haired German Shepherd. I had 2 white long-haired German Shepherds, but when I was having chemo, one of my dogs attacked me 3 times and bit me. Interestingly, that hasn't made me frightened of dogs. It made me frightened of that dog. However, as a child, if you're bitten by a dog, you're way more likely to be frightened of dogs generically and generally. Andy said, I've seen a clip where some tourists get cornered in the forest by an requested bear and remain very calm. Could it be that people react differently to fight or flight? Yes, because it's in, your question's in that answer. So, fight or flight, breeze, friend, fuck, fop, blow, fawn, foe, fawn, are all of those things. And it could be that they were very excited about it, as you said, it could be different things. But that's why we need to know somebody when we're doing a mindfuck. And we're not doing a mindfuck where somebody's going to bring a fucking bear in. If you are, or they do, I suggest you get a new dominant. Just saying, you know. That's not the sort of game I'm willing to play. That's not the sort of risk I'm willing to take. What are we doing today? Ha ha! A cane bear is in the room. I don't know if you've seen that film. It's even based on a true story. I know, right? You were just about to. But I mean, that story, that film, I don't know if you've seen that film, Cocaine Bear, is actually based on a true story, whereby people threw drugs out of a fucking airplane. A bear got its hands on a shit ton of coke, snorted it up its nose, and it went fucking mental. And it really did, and it was quite addicted. It was looking for more coke. I mean, you never know. Had bears to a hard limit. That and whisks for me. And again, I don't have an abnormal fear of whisks, even though they've done terrible things for me. Oh, I can't wait to see it. We're not as last movie. So we've got to be careful. So We also learn through experience, but we also learn through instruction. Careful, that's hot. The dog will bite. Be careful, snakes and spiders here, or be careful of these people. Not always, it's all the time, definitely not just the new ones. So we learn of that. We also learn positivity of that as well. We get to know a dog and then we don't feel as frightened anymore, and that makes a difference as well. So we need to know what our person's fears are in order to mindfuck them. We need to know what their bruises are. We need to play, and then you've really got to think about the seriousness of that, because there's a lot of safety involved in that. If you are responsible for this person and you're about to take them through an experience that makes them feel fear, is that really okay? If we're on high alert or if we're worried about things, we've got to be careful. Fear creates distraction. A lot of the reason we love fear is because it creates a distraction from what we're feeling. It can help us go somewhere else. It's why anxiety can feel really attractive sometimes. It's why we slip into anxiety, because anxiety is a distraction from maybe sadness or anger or something else as well. So fear can be really sexy. It might be that it's contagious. It might be that we feel very strongly. We have that potential for learning from it. So it can be really good, especially when we are off on some kind of magical ride that goes, fucking hell, this is really intense. I don't like those rides. Not all bears all of the time. This is Comfort Bear. Definitely not Comfort Bear. Definitely not. That's really funny. I like that. Comfort Bear is a sweet and very cuddly teddy bear. But also it makes me think of, do you remember those little cuddly toys and dragons that were really sweet when you squish them and like, do you remember those a few years ago? Like, you're so sweet. Ah! And babies and little kids were really crying from them. And again, shock, that makes a difference. As I mentioned before, I practiced Tantra. I've done some self-energy meditation for my own mindfuck. I felt unfocused or confused 24 to 40 hours afterwards. Have you heard of this before, to mitigate and manage this? I think it depends what sort of meditation you're doing. Why are you trying to fuck your own mind, and what are the consequences of that? I feel unfocused or confused. Yeah, I think we can be. If we're going into something that's slightly traumatic, I think we're sold meditation is the answer to everything. But actually, if we have something going on underneath, then it doesn't make us feel very safe sometimes. How does someone learn to feel fear? I don't think I've been scared since age 4, and as lovely as that might sound, I don't think it's how to feel safe. It isn't. How does someone learn to feel fear? I don't know you, and I don't know what's happened to you. We can become very oblivious to our fear and become very brave and very strong because of trauma and because of things that have happened. So we learn to disassociate from the feeling because it's so overwhelming. So what we need with that is, with a proper, fully trauma-trained therapist, not anybody else, is to do some exposure and to start to go into things that help us feel our feelings. And it might be that you feel other feelings in a different way first before you go into fear. Fear might be the last one that you relearn. It isn't healthy not to feel fear. Skyrise is the drive that gets up 15 floors not done in 40 seconds, fears me but tried 3 times, still fearful. But they want you to feel fearful, don't they? That's the whole point of a ride. It's the whole point of a mindfuck. That's what we're supposed to do. Andy, I suppose everyone's different. I've kept tarantulas and had one sat beside me while I just watch TV. I feel totally at ease with it. Everybody is different as to what they feel and why. They really are. So let's talk a little bit more about fear and fear triggers and what actually happens. So there are different factors that come in the family of fear, and they work in different ways. So it's all about intensity. How severe is this harm that I'm feeling threatened with right now? Timing. Is this now? Is it impending? Is it about to happen? Or is it a mindfuck where I'm waiting for it to happen? And it's coping. What can I do right now in order to manage this? And that's really quite sexy to play with if you think about it, if you want to do a mindfuck. How intense is this? What's the timing here? And what's the coping? Especially if coping is taken away, if the power of timing is taken away and it's quite intense, or the intensity changes. We get used to intensity when we play with a mindfuck. It's good to work with that. Fears and phobias aren't uniform. They're completely different, and fears and phobias are different, and everyone has different phobias of different things, and some people have no phobias at all. It's all about experience and epigenetics. So transgenerationally, some people pass down phobias to the next generation through their gene expression, but also through their experiences as well. So, like for example, if you've got a fear of wasps or insects, that's probably going to come from millions of years ago. thousands of years ago, mixed with the way your parents reacted around it as well. So that makes a difference. Okay, so let's go back to fear. So the family of fearful experiences, 3 factors: intensity, timing, and coping. When we can cope with a threat, it lessens or removes the fear. So when we're trying to do a mindfuck, we want to think or help the person think that they probably can't cope with this. When we can't decrease the threat of harm, maybe that's because we're tied up, maybe that's because we're gagged, maybe that's because we're not in control of what's happening. Again, it intensifies the fear. The fear spectrum, the least intense to the most intense. Trepidation is where fear starts. Maybe. Nervousness is where it goes to next. Then we have anxiety. Then we have dread, desperation, and panic. That's after panic, we then have horror. And at the top of the spectrum, we have fucking pure terror. I don't think a mindfuck should really take us to pure terror. I'm not sure that's good for anybody. We shouldn't be terrified for our lives or anything else as well. We could feel a little horrified. We could even feel a little bit panicky. We could certainly feel pretty desperate. I'm not sure terror is a great place to be. And often fear oscillates with the experience of anger for a lot of time. Perhaps, and it's often to do with a surprise. So what we know is surprise is really important in the art of mindfuck. What are the common triggers for fears that we can use that are also good for a mindfuck? Darkness or total loss of visibility. When we can't see what's going on, it fucks us over. So instead of just using a blindfold, which by the way ruins fake eyelashes, so don't always do that because people don't want that. So please think about that if your partner's wearing fake eyelashes.
Priorities, Debs. Come on, priorities.
But it is priorities, because I'll tell you what happened. You'll put your scarf around that person's, regardless of their gender, with their beautiful lashes on, and what they will then go and do is they will go, well, this is fucking ruining my eyelashes. You've just lost the mindfuck. 100% lost the mindfuck. And as Zoe says, the answer to that is the mindfold. And the mindfold is a blindfold that has, she's in with nice bits of sponge, so you can do this with your eyes, but you cannot see anything through it. You can't sneak it. So that also can really make us feel quite insecure, common fear trigger. The next fear trigger to think about is if we are flying or if we are high. I don't mean high from drugs. So that can also be good to play with, where maybe someone is suspended or someone is suspended in a chair safely by a rigger who really knows what they're doing. Mindfolds don't look very sexy though. Do you not think so? I think they look pretty cool. And do you know what, Jerry, if you don't like it and you want a nicer look, put a mindfold on, put a beautiful red silk scarf over the top. Double win, that's the way to do it. That now looks sexy. And if anything, you can even wrap it around the sides of the mindfold, tie it so it will stay and it will look absolutely beautiful. Bedazzle it, bejazzle it. But I would honestly just, if you like silk and satin, which a lot of us do when it comes to scarves, to blindfolds, and that scarfy feeling is all about silk, so just put it over the top. Steven Tyler, yeah. But people mainly like the look of silk. That's always that imagery that we have. Social interaction or rejection is another really, really big fear contributing factor. So if we're going to play into somebody being watched, I'm filming this. People are watching you now live. People are marking and scoring you out of 10 as to how you're about to do. People are watching and writing up a small synopsis for me. I might even send this to somebody that you know. If we start to play with that social interaction and potential for rejection, that has a big deal to do with it. But again, it's a mindfuck. Put this video up on FetLife 10 seconds after we're done. How do you think they'll score you? What do you think other people will think of you? Now, don't get me wrong, if that's totally not allowed, then we don't do it, do we? But it's also about all of these things. Animals and different things and death and dying come into fear triggers as well, but they're not really ones we can play with. Can we threaten death and different things? For sure. Can we threaten harm? Yes, we can. And could we pretend that maybe there's a spider on somebody? But what you'll get is a spike in fear response. So if someone doesn't like a mouse or a rat, and you say a rat's on their leg, you've just spiked straight to terror. And when you do that, that person is just ripped off their mindfold, broken 4 sets of handcuffs and ruined the moment. So if you spike into terror without a build-up, you'll get such an expressive reaction that it won't work. About 10, 12, 15 years ago, I broke somebody's consent. How did I break somebody's consent? They were tied up on the end of a beautiful bed. My dom and I at the time had kidnapped them with full express consent and permission. Consent and permission. I've spoken about this before. And we had a list of different things that we were allowed to do to this person or not. And I was pretty switchy at the time. I'm not particularly switchy anymore. And I remember slapping her around the face. And she went mad. It was an oak bed and she broke half of it. So she broke half of the St. Andrew's cross on this bed. And I was horrified and I didn't know what was going on. I was like, fuck, what's happening here? I was like, fuck. And I looked at the list. I thought, have I done something wrong? And then my dom was like, have I done something wrong? No, not really obviously. She was fucking fuming. And it was like, it's safer to keep her in those restraints from it now and try and talk to her. And I ended up phoning her dom. He said, oh yeah, fuck, I'm really sorry, I forgot to put that one on the list. It was a hard limit for her. Now, that taught me one thing. I'll tell you what I haven't done in the 15, 20 years since is I will never do something by proxy for anybody ever again. I will always speak to that person direct and get what they want. However, it still doesn't account for the fact that people still make mistakes about their own fucking list as well. So what we need to say is if something goes wrong, when something isn't good, even in this mindfuck, what are we going to heal? How are we going to heal this? What does it look like? What does it mean? Does this also surely boil down to trust? Playing with a partner who knows you intrinsically, who knows how to mindfuck you, but ultimately won't really fuck you up. How do you know that, Loki? So, right, and this is the problem with mindfucks. You might think that this is a mindfuck and it's really fun. You don't know if it's going to fuck you up. And that's the danger that we're talking about when we mindfuck or we play with a mindfuck. We don't know. You could play with someone who you don't know as well, takes things too far and does some real damage to your mind and well-being. And I'm also going to argue that can happen with somebody that you know really well, depending on your mood on the day, depending on news that you've heard, depending on some new drugs that you're taking, depending on, I didn't know this would open this. Many years ago, I spoke to a client who had a whole kidnap scene themselves. It was having a fantastic time. And it discussed all their limits in all their ways. And they had such a good consent conversation. And then all of a sudden, one of the dommies turned around and said something about them being a father to their children, about, how pathetic it was or something. He broke down. He utterly broke down, and it was a catalyst for him to come and see me. They hadn't discussed that. No one thought. She just thought, hey, this is really good, I'm going to go for this. Because he has spoken about his kids, so I'm going to go for it. He didn't realise he was in a really bad state about it either. Coca-Fan, we're not conclusive. We don't know all the time. We can think we know, but you are playing with fire because you don't know. And in that moment, it absolutely snapped him. And he ended up coming to see me for quite a few months afterwards, quite a long time, actually longer than that, because of the impact that had had. But at no point did he think, I know, if somebody says you're a shit dad, I won't be okay with that, or I will be okay with that. The point is, he didn't know either. We are human, I agree, Shadow. So we've got to be careful. If we have chronic anxiety or chronic fear all the time, we might not be able to remove ourselves from that threat. We might actually be involved in that situation because we're meerkatting. We're at a heightened sense of alert, of awareness. So if you're going to do a mindfuck on somebody with panic attacks and anxiety, or with severe phobias, or with severe mental health illnesses, or with anything that maybe is in physical, around hearts, around blood pressure, around fainting, around fitting, please be careful. Because if you don't perceive a threat, or you're in an over-threatening, over-stimulated conversation, we don't know. We don't know. It's my word, meerkatting. Sorry, for me, it's that image of that. It's just I watch the adverts too much, clearly, for the meerkat adverts. So that's my word. And it is a huge responsibility. I agree. It's really dangerous, isn't it? Because we don't know. So we are playing with fire. So you need to make sure that in your toolkit you have every fire extinguisher possible. You have the capacity to bring someone out of a panic attack. You have the capacity to help somebody through something. You have the capacity to be able to go and see someone else, to talk to someone about the damage that has potentially been done. That you might know some trauma techniques, that you might know some different things in order to soothe that fire to make a difference. So we have to be really fucking careful. The facial expression of fear is often confused with surprise. If you read any of Paul Ekman's stuff, that's really important. So both show raised eyebrows like that, so that makes a real difference. But fear's expression, the eyebrows are straighter and more horizontal, whereas in surprise they're raised and curved. You can't always make that happen by itself. The upper eyelid is lifted higher in fear than in surprise. That makes a difference as well. And there's more the whites of their eyes. That's why we talk about that. And the lips are often tense. Tense and pulled with fear, but in surprise. So is more fear and is more surprise. Very small differences. Arjun, how do you get someone out of a panic attack? Read my post on fuck for having a panic attack. What do I do now? There are at least 15 responses in there. Oh, this is going to sound so fucking big-headed. I can probably get someone out of a panic attack in about 1 minute, 20 seconds to 30 seconds on average. It's about knowing them a little bit. It's about lots of things. But I've got a piece on FetLife that says, fuck, they're having a panic attack, now what? If you kind of look up, if you follow me, you'll find it on there. If not, speak to me on FetLife, I'll try and find it for you.
I'll find it when it's open.
Oh, thank you. You're very kind. So I was confused once when someone was laughing, but I was unintentionally frightening them. So laughing is a really normal response to fear. It's called gallows laughter. It's all about discomfort and how we teach children. Some children are taught to be comical, to try and make you laugh, to try and turn things off. So gallows laughter comes from when we used to hang, draw and quarter people. We still do in some countries, but it used to be a family outing. We used to take kids to a picnic to watch somebody being hung, drawn and quartered. Not the sort of picnic I want to go on. Jesus, like we have sausages for life, I think. So it used to be, but it was so horrific. Yes, it's completely the same as cosmic polite. It's called gallows laughter, gallows response. And there's a really good psychologist. Oh God, she's called the Attachment Nerd on Instagram, and she was talking about this the other day. I've written about it, and we talk about. Oh, thank you very much. You're very kind. We talk about it quite a lot. So gallows laughter is a humour response that often people have to try and make it better, to try and make it go away, to try and make themselves feel better. It's something that they've learned. It makes a difference. So gallows laughter is a really big thing. When people are frightened, they'll scream. Not always, because some people go silent. But if they are going to scream, it's more higher pitch. So we know when somebody's frightened, their voices go up a lot. Doesn't matter what gender they are, in any way, shape or form. And I mean every gender under the sun there, our voices will heighten in their pitch and they become more strained. Or they're going really, really silent. Sensations of fear, you'll feel cold. The way your blood changes, you might sweat, you might tremble. I have a dog called Duck. So I have Duck, and I have Goose, and I have Luna as well, but I've got Duck, Goose. And Duck, when I first picked him up, as soon as I went to pick him up, he just went like this. He was fucking terrified, and he still is. He's got a lot better. And I was like, oh shit, I'm buying an anxious dog, a really anxious, terrified dog. And I was like, oh, what do I do here? Because do I take him? Because actually I think I'll be really good with him, and he'll be loved, and he can learn to get better with this, which he has done. Or do I just leave him and say, no, I'm not taking him because he's anxious? And I didn't do that. Fuck me, that dog becomes a rigid, trembling mess every time you go and pick him up. Everything he does. A posture of fear is often one of pulling away, freezing, immobilization. So you can actually see it in somebody's body. The function of fear is to reduce harm, but it can also make us turned on as well. I'll come to that one in a minute. We really want to stop the threat. So we often feel fear in ourselves, and we respond to that because of what we're used to, which is why it's really good. We like to feel fear. Some of you might really, really love horror films. I don't, but a lot of people love them. Some of you might really, really love things along the lines of those really adrenaline-seeking, thrilling rides that we do as well. So people, I find it really intolerable. I cannot deal with this. That's me. I'm in Florida every year with cheerleaders, and we take the kids to Disney, and we take the kids maybe to another couple of places just for a day or so whilst they're doing Summit or Worlds. And honestly, every time they get on Rock and Roll or one of the other rides, I'm like, oh, I hate it because I don't feel any pleasure. I don't like it. I don't mind the lower aspect of fear, like on a Star Wars ride or any of those things. And the same for horror, I'm the same as you. I'm like, oh no, like okay, I can watch that bit through there. I can't deal with it. And the music and everything else that happens in order to create that mood. So some of us hate it, some of us don't. Verity says, there's definitely been times during knife play and him holding it to my throat, telling me how easy it would be to kill me, or that I'd be powerless to stop him, or forced exhibition of some scenes where he gets into my ear to point out people are watching and judging. Do you know, it's the stuff that he's saying in your ear that's making the difference. It's the words. If the knife was there, or you didn't know that people were there and you just assume that they would, your own mind can start to do those things. I'm going to talk about fear and sexual arousal in a minute. So we can seek it out. And we also respond to fear in other people. So if somebody by us is frightened, having those lovely, delicious moments that if you do that, that's going to hurt that person, and you've got that lovely dilemma about what's about to happen and fear for another person, they can really work well as well. We don't need to feel another person's fear to help them cope, but we do feel that way sometimes. It really does make a difference. So fear isn't a phobia, it's really different. And fear also produces quite a lot of dopamine, especially if it's a staged fear experience. So if you have a staged fear experience, there's more dopamine involved, which is also connected more to sexual arousal. So the reason we feel that way, fear can become pleasure, haunted houses, roller coasters, rides, all those different things. The reason we feel that way is because we get something called the excitation transfer process that happens. So your body and brain remain aroused even though the scare is done. So we feel very differently. And that transfer process is quite interesting for us. And it's a theory, it's a physiological arousal state that it dissipates slowly for us. So you can have a look, you can look it up and look at that excitation, what happens, but it's to do with the chemicals that are released. It's also to do with pain, and pain, the way we tolerate pain, because fear is pain. And a lot of the time, a lot of arousal, because it's a heightened stage, when you're turning your t-shirt inside out, if we're feeling a lot of fear, we're actually also feeling a lot of excitement, because physiologically, those things feel exactly the same to us. And that's sometimes that confusion, we call it confusion, or it's cross pathways, or it's that connection. And also as a child, if we've developed ways of handling this sort of stuff and we want to handle the way we feel, sometimes we might make it more sexual. And it takes a while for adrenaline cortisol to wear off. It takes a pretty long time for those things to wear off. We can get rid of it quicker by physical activity. We can jump it off, we can shake it out, the Dulux dog it, really get rid of it. That's not what we want when we're doing a mind fuck. We want to keep that going and keep that running, so we've got a heightened state all the time, especially with norepinephrine and adrenaline. But dopamine is one of those things that makes a difference. Fear keeps you safe. Safe is quite sexy if we think about it as well. So when we're thinking, so it's so complicated, isn't it? It's very, how we feel about it does make a big difference. So we have to think about that as well. And when we're suffering with adrenaline, what we have to think about, I say suffering like it's a really bad thing, or norepinephrine, it is your hormone that helps us with that fight, flight, freeze, friend, fuck, flop, fuck. Andy says the immediate reaction for a lot of watching a horror film is laughter, and it seems that we want to fear them after we laugh our heads off. Because of that pleasure, because of the flood of chemicals, and because of it's the relief and the release of all these chemicals as they start to go, and that can be sexy as well. So if you've got epinephrine, your body reacts more quickly to a threat in that moment, which is a heightened state of hormones coming in to help you. It's released by your adrenal glands and by some neurons. That's the way adrenaline works. The adrenal glands are on top of your kidneys, and they're responsible for lots of hormones. What they're responsible for: cortisol, noradrenaline, adrenaline, and aldosterone, I think. They're the main hormones that your adrenal glands work on. And then what you've got as well on top of that is the pituitary gland also influences and controls your adrenal glands. And you've got two parts of that as well. So the inner glands produce adrenaline. So it really helps us counter, control, or work through that adrenaline rush that we actually experience. So what happens when we get that rush? So what we get, let's just look at my puppies playing outside, sorry. They're very cute. Oh, there you go, we're just talking about dogs. Sometimes dogs can read excitability in other dogs as fear. Yes, exactly. T-shirt, inside out. And then they can become anxious or reactive. I suspect this, at least in part, because of their autonomic nervous system reading the other dogs saying yes. The humans sometimes do this as well. Yes, absolutely. Because we don't know for sure what it is that somebody's feeling. The actual one feeling that actually is palpable in another human being is it is anxiety, it is stress, it's fear, anger, sadness, all the other emotions that we have don't cross over that barrier. And that comes from, when you think about, if we go back for thousands and thousands of years, what we're looking at is we need to know when other people are frightened, because it's really handy, because it might keep us safe as well. That works in the same way. And when I've got...
That's meerkatting.
Meerkatting, it is, isn't it? One meerkat looks good. What are we looking at? What's that? I mean, if I said to you, oh my God, look over there, and I was really convincing in that moment, you would look over there, and I could be joking. And you know, dogs really read people. They're trying to read people, and they can misinterpret, and so do humans. Is there a hormone that requires more care after having a sexual mindfuck versus a traumatic mindfuck? Is there a hormone that requires more care? The human requires more care. The hormones that are produced actually care for us and fuck us up. We're very clever. We make sure that the right hormones come in. I have hyperactive adrenal glands. It is called aldosteronism. I'll get this right in a minute. I'm not very good with pronunciation sometimes. So, adrenaline rush in the brain, amygdala perceives it. That's what it's doing. That's what we were talking about earlier. It's the command center, and it says to the sympathetic nervous system, oh, be careful, this is really bad. It's really bad. And what we want, what we have really, when they're talking, let's talk about dogs. So the dogs that are talking to us here are called killer and slasher. They're salivating, they're vicious dogs, they've been trained, they're probably black and tan, and they've got these huge collars on. Now, if we want to change that, we need to change them into fluffy and lovely, and they need to be little fluff balls, and we need to change some of those things that can help us. However, it's a short circuit response when we've got killer and slasher. I like goose and duck. And back up. Yeah, I would love to have a diagram of where the various hormones are released. You can look it up anywhere. Honestly, just look up in any way, shape, or form adrenaline rush. Look up fear, what happens in the brain. Look up. You can have a look at where the hypothalamus is, where the prefrontal cortex is, and how these hormones work. And remember what I just said. It's not just about them being produced in the brain. You really have to remember that, because it's not your adrenal glands, you're talking kidneys. So it's all that control, and it's your pituitary gland that also then controls some of that as well. So it's not just in the brain, it's kind of all over the body. I have to leave, but wanted to thank you, hugely insightful. I hope to join one of these again. I'll probably do it. No worries. So let me make sure I get through all of this, because otherwise I'm not going to finish, am I? So learning how adrenaline affects us really does make a difference, or norepinephrine or epinephrine. If we perceive danger, that's when our hypothalamus starts to take over. So what we want to do if we're doing a mindfuck is give a perceived threat, perceived idea of danger in some way, shape, or form. So then we can communicate your sympathetic nervous system and start to take over and respond. That signal. What happens with that adrenaline? A huge rush of energy. Like some of us, sort of like, you know, when you tap your foot and your foot's really going, so you've got that, a lot of people with ADHD and anxiety and stress will really move their foot in response, and it's like that drug. And my mum used to put her hand on my fucking knee all the time. Like, you know, talking about a youngster, like this all the time, hyperstimulation sort of things that I would do as a kid. That was so hard. But adrenaline binds to receptors on your liver cells to break up usable sugar molecules. And that's glucose. That's what it's working with. I crochet for this. Yeah, I get it. Makes you breathe faster. It binds receptors to muscle cells in the lungs as well. Makes you breathe faster. Stimulates the cells of the heart to beat faster. Doesn't bind in the same way. It sends your blood messages to your blood vessels to contract. So it stimulates perspiration and makes us sweat. And we're like, oh, fuck. And the blood vessels go towards major muscle groups. Why? Because you need to be ready to stay really still, or you need to stay ready to run, do whatever it is you're going to do. This is so is this relevant, Debs? I did a double dom scene a while back while I was branded and naked. He had cut inflicted in the likes of flogging, and yet instead of feeling fear, I couldn't stop laughing. I think it was a mixture of I had an image in my mind that the craziness of the scene, before of the realisation I was doing something that suppressed for so long, or whether it was a coping mechanism. Loads of people giggle when they're hit. Loads and loads of people giggle and laugh when they're hit. It is, again, autonomic nervous response. It's really normal. Sympathetic is what we do. Sympathetic nervous system. Great insight. I've been looking into the hormone release for a while now. Thank you. So yes, it's really normal. It can be euphoria, but it can also be relief. I'm doing this, I'm managing this. And when we have relief and then all of these things are coming up, we stop hormones. We actually stop, not hormones, pancreas bind, so we stop creating insulin and energy and different things. And it's crazy what it will do to us. What that adrenaline rush will do, and that release can really make us laugh. CBT not cut. Okay, I giggle and laugh when I'm being hit. I never understood why. Tops, I just think I'm ratting, so hit me harder. No, absolutely not. So what causes adrenaline rushes, as we said, all those things that I spoke about earlier is really important to remember. Anything that makes you feel fear is also going to add to that. So it's also about knowing what is it this person is feeling, what is it they like, why are they doing this. However, you're going to have to really look at your safety when you do this sort of thing. How well do I know this person? What are the limits? What are the boundaries? One person's fucking love it is another person's trauma, is another person's trigger, is another person's nightmare. So don't assume that you know. We can cause massive harm when we're doing this sort of thing. Especially, I talk about suitcases in people. So I talk about when you go on holiday, that you might have a suitcase. Turn all the lights off because I'm getting so hot again. I'm sorry. So when we go on holiday, you're told if there's a suitcase there that is unattended, that it might be risky. Why? Well, what we're taught is it might be an unattended suitcase, might be a bomb. That's what we're taught, aren't we? People, human beings, have unattended suitcases in their minds where they haven't sorted out some of their shit. It's a bit like a Pandora's box. Now, if you're in that airport and there's a magic bubble and something explodes the suitcase, you'll get 2 or 3 things going on. Like, fuck, that's just pants. Or, oh shit, now I feel really guilty. Oh, fuck. And you might laugh about it. You might feel different things. So with relief comes release. And that release can happen in really different ways for us hormonally. And laughing is one of those things. However, if we open up one of those suitcases when somebody isn't ready or capable, by doing a mind fuck, we are now creating a problem. You can think you know your triggers, I can tell you now you don't. Don't fuck the suitcases full of old sex toys. Some of those can be really traumatic as well. I mean, how often have I seen some of my rubber bits and pieces just melt and go absolutely horrific? And I go to pick up that glove and I'm like, ugh, it's sticking to my hand. I clearly don't play often enough. I tell you that's why it's all rotting in my cupboard. So you've got to be really careful. And I've got a massive write on how to look after your sex toys and how to clean all the right things, because you do all the wrong things in the wrong way and they all fuck up. That could be a right thing. The cost of replacing your play and toy wardrobe, it's going to be thousands, I tell you. So if we have a history of abuse or trauma or disassociation or dissociative identity disorder, or if we have maybe, actually I would argue that EUPD and BPD can come into this, because emotional unstable personality disorder, we can also get psychosis, right, as well. So if we're going to get psychosis or something along those lines, we're out of touch with reality. If we then try and create an alternative, we are creating more alternate realities, which is not healthy for the person that we're about to play with. Somebody might say, but I want to recreate my trauma, that would be really good for me. I talk about this all the time, and I know it's not always popular. It is not always a good idea to recreate trauma. I know we think it is, because we're going to have more control over it. Have you seen some of the people that we play with around here or anywhere else? Honestly, they're in charge of recreating your trauma, and if they do the slightest thing wrong, and it doesn't go the way you want it to, or there's a bit of a clusterfuck, or something happens, you're like, well, I'm fucked. And you've got to be really careful about that. People want to recreate trauma to try and get control over it. It doesn't always work that way. This is very interesting. When I have seizures, there's some hormonal releases, more like calming down after I have the oh fuck laugh, and seizures, I'm coming down. Yes, and it's the relief and the release. Shadow, that's definitely what it is hormonally. And it's exhaustion in its own way as well. And we often laugh when we're exhausted, because it also re-oxygenates, gives us a little bit of energy, like cyan does. Vagal, polyvagal, vasovagal, whatever you want to call it, vagal nerve theories as well. So should we be careful about mind fucking if we have some sort of trauma? Look, it's so trendy for everyone to say, oh no, recreate it, it will be fine. I don't know if you've ever seen it when it isn't fine. It isn't fine. And I'm the one who deals with the damage afterwards, because people come to me and it takes fucking months and years. It can be really good when it's good, and when it goes wrong, it's horrific. Andy, I'd agree with you. I don't know a lot about psychology, but I would never say it's good to recreate severe trauma. No, not for me. The problem is we do try and recreate trauma. If you read some of the best people like Bessel van der Kolk, or it doesn't matter who you read, Daniel Siegel, all of them, we do try and recreate trauma. That's the whole point of it. However, if you're going to do that, please do it alongside seeing somebody who's a trauma specialist. At least do that. So have really good trauma therapy with techniques that can help get you out of trauma and help with those situations, because your dom certainly doesn't know. And if your dom is doing it in such a way, dom of any gender, of any whatever, that I'm just using that word, if they're trying to therapize you at the same time, now we've got transfer of power, and that's going on too. Dickens says, absolutely agree, brain can struggle to tell the difference between imagination and reality, so recreate it and reimprint it. Absolutely. So we re-traumatize on a cellular level because the body remembers. Read your Babette Rothschilds, read your Bessel van der Kolks, read your Daniel Siegels, read all of them. Like, they're all out there. Exposure therapy should be done with the therapist, not in you. However, you also get a lot of dominatrixes at the moment who say to you that they will help you do this. And that's great. You tell me exactly what your qualifications are around trauma and who you're registered with be my next question. Just because you've done it a few times doesn't mean you know what you're doing or how to do it. So please be careful. Even if you have a mind fuck or you're going to play with this and you might not be aware that you have something, there can still be something there. I can talk to people for 6 months to 2 years and they say, I think something really bad happened to me when I was little. My job as a therapist isn't respond to that or jump on that. I shouldn't make it real. I shouldn't make it not real. I've got to hold a space where it could be reality. It's not my job to lead. It's not my job to make that. And it's really important that we don't jump on it. So sometimes we can awaken on things that we aren't even aware of. So I think we should be very careful about what we're about to do and what it looks like. And I'm going to argue that you cannot consent. I know this sounds crazy. I'm a big advocate for consent. I've got a fuck all piece of writing around consent, which Jerry might be finding now or not. Whatever. Thanks, Jerry. I've got a massive writing on consent, but part of what I say in that writing is we can't ever truly consent because we do not know what's going to happen at the end of it. We don't have a set system whereby we know exactly what's going to happen how. So we can consent as good as damn it. We can consent as near as damn it, but we can never fully consent because we do not know the full consequences of what's about to happen, especially in mind fuck. Andy, because in all honesty, I'm sure 99% of doms have spent 30 odd years training professionals you have. I haven't. That's like 20 years I've spent training. 20 years worth and 41 years in kink. It's quite a lot, isn't it, really? But it doesn't make me an expert either. It just doesn't. Because everyone is different and it's really complex to try and do this stuff. So my argument is that consent doesn't work here, especially with a mindfuck, because we don't actually know what we're consenting to. And then people get really involved in their own journey with a mindfuck. Like, it's quite addictive, the power to fuck with somebody's mind. It's quite nice. It's quite lovely when we are changing or warping someone's reality or their perception of reality, and it's sexy and hot spot. We have to be really careful not to get carried away with that as well. Cosmopolite, I agree with that. We also don't have control over our nervous system, so we can't consent 100%. Agreed. I don't know if you remember, some of you have seen me for quite a few years. Somebody came in quite a few years ago and got a little bit cross with me. I don't know if you remember this, because they were saying that when they go into subspace, when they come round, they tend to punch the person. I don't know if any of you were there at the time. Yes, a few of you were, so it's nodding. And they were saying, well, I punched the person, and Harris remembers as well. And they basically said, you're not going to tell me I can't do this, are you? You're not going to be like everyone else. And I went, gee, fucking right I am. You need to be able to control yourself. If you're coming out some kind of subspace and you punch the person you're with non-consensually, I don't want to play with you. It's not safe and it's not okay. We need to learn control over ourselves. But we can't always gain control over ourselves, especially if we're now talking about our sympathetic nervous system responding in such a way. Also, I think we have to be really fucking careful when it comes to a mindfuck about the people-pleasing aspects of submissives. I really want to do this. I want to do it for you, and I'm absolutely fine with it. I haven't got a problem. Years ago, I had another dog. This dog had been very traumatically brought up. Great with me, great with my kids, not so good with strangers. Definitely had a cage, had a system, and definitely looked after this dog. Very protective of this dog because of the problems that this dog had. He'd been very cruelly abused. So he knew when someone came in, if they'd been bitten or had trouble before with the dog. He knew every single time. I was having this party. There were about 300 people there, 300 kids. Again, it was my beautiful home. It was really lovely. And we had the pool all set up, and we had a disco outside. It was really cool. And one of the other mums came because it was my third eldest daughter's party with two of her best friends who were twins. And Jane walks in, and I said to Jane, Jane, are you okay with dogs? And she went, yeah, why? And I said, well, Rami is a complex dog. I don't let him off the lead. He's brilliant with children. I've got to be very careful if anyone has been bitten. Now, I know all of these children, so at the moment, he's pretty safe. I've got to let him out in this area, but if you have a problem with dogs, I really need to know, because I'm going to keep him in this area and keep him away and keep engaged to keep him safe and to keep you safe. Sure. I'm fine with dogs. I love dogs. I've never had a problem. Let the dog in the garden area. Next thing I know, there's a scream. He's bitten her. He's bitten her stomach. He's clamped down and clamped away, giving her a warning. And I said, what the fuck? I don't. She said, I knew you shouldn't have let him out. I fucking hate dogs. I've been bitten twice before. There's a real problem with dogs. And I was like, oh my God. And I said, Jane, you probably just reached a point where I might have to have my dog put down. I'm so sorry. Let's get you to hospital. Let's get you antibiotics. I fucking asked you. Why didn't you answer me honestly? I said, because I'm really distraught. I don't know what to do now. And in fact, he did end up having to be put down. Now, I didn't really have to go down that line because it's a whole other story. But he did draw blood and she did need antibiotics. And she didn't sue or anything. She absolutely saw her fault in it. But her response to me was, I just didn't want to cause any trouble. I thought it'd be easier for the party and it'd be better. So when we're doing a mindfuck, don't be a Jane. All right? Don't be a Jane. And you've really got to remember that, because if you're going to play with a mindfuck and there's a little bit of a suitcase somewhere, don't be a Jane. And if we go to please, that suitcase will spill open. The same as I say to people when they want to go potty. If you have a hair crack of anything that's not okay, and you put a person-sized person in it, it'll wedge it open like nothing you've ever experienced before. You have to be, not just be honest, you have to be aware of who you are. You have to understand. And it's about not pretending to be somebody. And it's really important. It was not a pleasant time. Especially once we're able to identify the actions on normal response, handle it. I agree, Bunny. If you know you're going to punch someone, fucking sort it out. And then people say lovely things about honesty in the dogs. So people say, oh yeah, I do get some anxiety. I do have panic attacks. I do these things. Yeah. Hope you do. I hope you really understand what that means. And as I said, we talk about fight, flight, and freeze, but we've also got to really watch this one when we go into friend, buck, block, bow, and fawn. And we've got to be really, really careful about if the person is a fawner or a fucker. That's terrible, doesn't it? This person's a fucker. This person is a fawning fucker. That could be even worse, couldn't it? So we've got to be really careful, because actually they might be doing these things to please us as a triggering emotional response. I flop. Yeah, people do. Like at least you know. It's wonderful that you know. Andy's saying animals can be unpredictable, humans too. Roy, that's why I'm ultra cautious when I play with someone new. I found that sometimes subs say what they think a dom wants to hear. And I would argue that doms say what a sub wants to hear, and I would argue that everybody doesn't know how to fucking communicate or get it right, because we're all so busy trying to make it nice instead of just working our shit out. So we've got to be really careful, really, really careful about what we do. And if we're talking about animals, I know one of the things that compassion sadists, I've written about the F's. I've got to write it anywhere. I don't know. Yeah, flop is that. But yes, friend, buck, block, freeze, fawn, foe. What have I done? Freeze, fight. You know, fight or flight is the classic, isn't it? Fuck off, you can't. Oh, fucking hurt you. Okay. And that freezing of you don't know what to do. Foe, F-O-E, make a friend of somebody, try and make it all okay. You're an enemy, but you're trying to make the person an enemy, but actually what you want is to make them a friend, so you get lost between those two. So it's an F-O-E rather than F-A-U-X, which is kind of fake, different meaning. But we have to be careful that people understand that they have interesting responses when it comes to this, and we have to fight, flight, freeze, fuck, foe, flop, fawn. We're saying fawn, which is a major one. The problem with fawning is that people who do it don't usually know what they want, but it doesn't stop them from attacking you for reading them as a whole person instead of listening to their words if someone does this wrong. Completely agree with you. Any of these can be that. We can get lost in a victim circumstance that says it's your problem, you should have read it, you should know better, you should know differently, which is why I'm also writing a massive piece on accountability, responsibility and self-advocacy. I don't think it'd be a particularly popular writer because it's down to you. It's down to us. So I think we have to be really careful about that as well. So we have to be careful about the way we do this. Fight, flight, freeze, friend, fuck, block, foe, fawn. 8. 2, 3, 6. I feel like I've got to say them 3,000 times before someone writes the whole plate. You know, it's one of those situations. I'm like, which one's next? Which one's next? Right, so we've got to be very careful when we are mind fucking about the person's okayness, about their consent, about their capacity to consent, about all of those things. What's that writing, Jerry?
It's fawning, pleasing, even submitting as a trauma response.
Oh yeah, so
I don't know if that's the one you meant.
Oh, this is a great one. This is all about fawning. I didn't write this. I completely and utterly. What did I do? It's one of the best writings I've ever seen on fawning. It's brilliant. Really.
Pete Walker was it? I'm just looking through your post. Anyway, that's it. That's the best one I can find.
Thank you. That's brilliant. That's a perfect response. I think I've got a little bit on having a panic attack when we talk about these things as well. There's something in there. I think as well, what you've got to be careful of is where you go during and after a mindfuck. Are you going to go into some kind of subspace? Are you going to have a huge adrenaline drop afterwards and a response? That's not just sub drop. And sub drop doesn't fucking exist anyway. I'm really sorry, it's everybody's drop, right? A drop is a drop. If you're a musician and you play something, you end up dropping. If you're an amateur dramatics like Andy, and you're on a show and then you love it and then you're not doing it the week after, you experience drop. It's a change in intensity in chemicals. But if we mix an adrenaline drop with that, that's got a completely different impact on us. So we've got to be very careful about how low we can feel. I'm in con drop at the moment. There you go. Perfect example of that. Amdram drop. It's everyone's drop. It's just drop. I think because of the human emotions we are discussing tonight, you can never fully guarantee what a human will feel at any one point, or how they will respond, or how they will think, or how they will behave. Thoughts, behaviours, and feelings. We aren't that particular person experiencing what they're experiencing. No, we don't know what they've experienced. And then we don't know what they've experienced. Thank you very much for the compliment. Thank you. That's very sweet and kind of you. So we've got to be really careful about the things that we do, because we can overstimulate sensations, we can understimulate the different sensations that people feel. So noise makes a big difference, temperature makes a big difference. So we've got sound, we've got all of our senses that we can play with. Taste is a good one. If somebody's got a taste in their mouth and when they hear something, that's going to take them to a very different place. If you want, so like for example, Parma violets make me think of being a kid. So if you stuff my mouth with Parma violets and then say very horrible grown-up things to me, that contradiction is going to fuck with my brain. And it's going to fuck with my brain quite cleverly. Especially if you then slip the leather about at the same time. And I'm like, oh, there's just so many contrasting emotions. What you're after is the contrast. And we use all of our senses from that as well. And our senses are really handy to do that. So that's smell, sight, touch, taste, feelings, all of these things really matter around us in order to create a mindfuck and that experience. They really make a difference. Okay, so there is a great, I looked this up when we talk about domestic violence, I did look one thing up. I found this drawing. I'll try and send it to you so you can have a look at it. Your panic attack writing is pure gold from a first aid and mental health first aider point of view. That's very kind of you. Thank you very much, Emily. That's and Cuthbert. Thank you both. Yeah, I think that's the reason I wrote it. The reason I wrote that is if you are a top and a bottom, or a switch, I don't care who you are, and someone is like to have a panic attack, know what to do for them. Ask them, it's really good, and if you can't ask them and they don't know, that's a mental, it is first aid. It's mental health first aid in that moment. So people play mind games, tactics. There's a power and control word about mind games that was written by somebody, and I can't remember who it is. I think it was somebody Murphy quite a while ago, and they talk about power and control around domestic violence. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, of course it's not. And what we're trying to do is use some of these things to play mind games and to play with us. So we might have one-sided power games where it's all about control. We might have mind games. We might have inappropriate restrictions. She does this whole list that you can have a look at if you look at her name is Claire Murphy, and she actually has this tactics, power and control wheel. That's what it's called. If you look up the power and control wheel, the things that we can do, the things that we can look at. And I get this is domestic abuse. It is not the same thing. There is no consent in domestic abuse at all. I'm not advocating any form of abuse. I'm saying a lot of what we do, we can use very similar tactics and organise. Oh, thank you very much. Oh, Jerry, you're wonderful tonight.
Wonderful tonight. I am wonderful tonight.
Thank you. So I'm not advocating domestic abuse. Please, can we just make sure that we realise the difference in consent and everything else as well? There is a huge difference, and we can use some of the tactics that people use, like degradation and humiliation, in order to make that work. So, what does it mean if we torture someone, if we do these things? Look, people are still being tortured, and people use these techniques really cleverly for control, for intimidation, for all sorts of different things. And people are tortured and targeted for all sorts of reasons: the colour of their skin, the way they walk, their disability, their religion, their gender, their age. There are lots and lots of things. I find it really interesting getting closer to 60. So in your 20s, you're very likely to be assaulted in some way, shape or form, early 20s. That then disappears from mid to late 20s onwards. By the time you start to hit 60 again, 60 I was going to say, because that's the new word for 60. So by the time you hit 60 again, by the time you hit 60, the likelihood of that goes through the roof again, because you're then considered vulnerable. So I think we have to be really careful with age, everything, it really comes into it. So people will deal with a lot of torture in their lives. So again, if you meet somebody who comes from a war-torn country, if you meet somebody who's maybe escaped from somewhere or had something happen to them, don't offer them a mindfuck, because you are triggering something that's really deep and not okay afterwards, and that makes a real difference. Fear conditioning is also quite interesting. So when we talk about Pavlovian fear conditioning, when we're talking about the sort of thing, so what happens is we learn to predict certain things and we learn to avoid. So we have aversive or evasive stimulus or responses, and different things are associated with different stimuli. When we look at that, what we've also got to be careful of, if we consistently do mind fucks in somebody, you can create conditioning. You can create a situation where somebody really doesn't feel okay about something, or you can do the opposite, which is what somebody said before. They've had so much conditioning that they're not frightened of that thing anymore. So the key to a good mind fuck is to play it up and to change it up all the time. It's a really good idea to swap it, change it, and play with different fears at different times, and do something else underneath. So fear conditioning will make someone frightened of something, but fear conditioning can also make somebody hardened to something. So again, be really aware of those things when you're playing with fear and you're about to do those things. We have different forms of fear, right, as well. So that's really important as well. Situation specific. Well, we can really play with situation specific fear, can't we? Is where it comes to a mindfuck. It could be that they're in a club. It could be that this certain situation happens. It's only when you use a keyword or a trigger word. We can hypnotize people with key and trigger words. And we can associate things. Conditioning isn't that hard to do to another human being. I don't know if you've met you know, when you look at some of those programs from before, what's the one with Penny when he's sitting on the sofa and every time she does something good, he offers her a chocolate? What's that one? I can't remember. And it's so big. It's brilliant. Some word I would tell you, I didn't quite get that. Oh, Big Bang Theory, thank you very much. He conditioned Penny to be good and well behaved with chocolate. It's really quite easy to do. We do it to children all the fucking time. So we can mind fuck the positivity, we mind fuck the negativity, we can mean well and things still go wrong. It's just something most not quite sure what you meant there, Andy. One of the biggest drops in anagram German officer in cabaret. Not in any way do I agree with anything the SS did, but I suppose you could class it as a scene, the uniform even on stage, when a scene can transcend your opinion of yourself, albeit in fantasy land, and this really is something we need to be aware of. Method acting is a form of acting. Getting involved in a part, believing who you are, actually happens to a lot of us, in many respects. Melody, can you please be careful about when you stand up, because you don't have a lot of room.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I'm on it.
Maybe just turn the lid in or something. Thank you for being on it. I did say, you know, clothes isn't just pretty skimpy underwear, so it isn't, not here. So we can get very involved in method acting and we can really start to believe who we are. I remember doing Calamity Jane professionally. I'd done quite a lot of stuff. My first degree was in performance related arts. Thank you, Melody. Appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Thank you for the sorry. Appreciate you for saying that. We have to be really careful, don't we, sometimes, that we can believe something, we start to play something. And I think we've got to be careful around mindfucks and being dominant, being submissive. That is not who you are in every way, shape or form. So we've got to be very careful about that, because we can perceive ourselves as different on ego counts, and we work in a different way. I am the uber dom, I am the uber. Are you? Because now you've got to do what you're told in your work situation, or if you're different environment. Just doing Cabaret to Schindler's List, the film came out the week after. I went to that film on a high for being a character and literally came out of floods of tears. I then initially had my mind from fuck with you. Yeah, and I think that's about perception and reality. We can really get away with it. When I did Calamity Jane, we were doing this tour, and the guy that played Bill Hickok, we agreed the way that we would kiss. We talked about consent, and I had to strip in it. I went down to a corset and a pair of bloomers, and when he grabbed me on stage, some of the first nights, he stuck his tongue right down my throat. He completely went against my consent about how we were going to, and he said, "It's really sorry, I just got carried away in the character." Yeah, still not okay. So mindfucks can happen to all of us in different ways. I talk to my clients often about how they condition their dogs without realising it. I think, yes. You know what people don't realise about bad dogs is it's bad ownership 9 times out of 10. It's the messages that they give, it's the systems that they give to somebody else. It's the same with ownership of human beings as well. If you, for example, if you want to control a child, and we think about controlling a child, actually you teach more control to the child if you control yourself. Where if you just try and control the child or change things, it completely changes things. So again, we've got to be really careful. Great job for being super excited and jumping all over humans. I know, I'm going to give you lots of attention, get down. Just hear the voice, just hear the activity. Ignoring, turning back, doing different things. Conditioning really helps. I agree, there's times I have read people at top level based on the choice of words and tested trigger words for estimate or understand them a bit more, which could show me their mental strength or weakness. So I'm also going to say to you, don't do that. Don't test someone else's okayness or trigger words to estimate them. That's not consented to. So I would argue that I don't think you should be doing that. And I'm picking on you a bit here. I don't think it's a good idea to do. I just want to see what you're going to do and see how it's going to go. I need trust from you to understand that you won't do that to me, and you need trust from me for that to work as a dual thing here. It can be useful to take care of them. It doesn't matter whether we intend no harm. Do we have the expertise to work with that? Is this something we truly know about? And do we have the right to do that? As I said at the beginning with mindfucks or anything else as well, we don't mean to cause any harm. But if we use a trigger word to see what someone's going to go, where they're going to go, we don't know what's going to happen to them. And do we have the capacity to help them through it? And do we have the right to do that? That's what I'm talking about. So we can mean really well, which is why I'm picking on you about this. And apologies, I really understand if you want to leave and go, fuck me, she's gone for me. Who the fuck is she? She's a cunt. I think the problem is, and I appreciate you saying that is true, we do things with the intention of doing good and to understand, but then we don't also understand the harm that we cause. when you have a child and a parent, and the parent turns around and says, but I didn't mean any harm, I didn't really mean it when I told them they were a little shit and I didn't love them. The child doesn't remember how many times I said I love you, the child remembers the one time you said I don't. And that's the power of this. So I don't think we should be playing with that shit, so I really appreciate you saying that's true. Great job for being super clear. Yes, I've seen it happen too, Debs. Anything else thinking I can sit the tongue down and leave like, yeah, for sure. Bill can confirm. Yeah, so I think it's really dangerous for us to play with those things. I don't think it's safe. They do it on stage because they know the other person can't do anything about it because the show must go on. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we can stop it, can't we? But people have paid a fortune in some way, shape, or form. There is a difference between perceived and real threat here as well. As I said, that's really important too. I really think we have to be careful. We have to look at, one of my favourite things is humiliation. I have a massive writing on humiliation, degradation, and emotional sadism and masochism. If you want to know how to hurt someone, humiliation is a brilliant way. However, humiliation is also edge play, and humiliation is often used in this sort of play as well. Other sources always appreciate lots of insight, case television, there's always room to improve. I really appreciate you hearing that, and I thank you for hearing that. I just don't think we've got the right to trigger others to see, so I can test. I just don't think we've got the right, and we don't know where they're going. I don't do that in therapy, and I don't have the right, but people are asking me to fix them, whatever that means. I'm not going to sit there and trigger them. No, we would have to have massive discussions about exposure therapy, about how that works, about putting them in that situation. We really would. Thank you. So there is a writing for you on everything you want to know about humiliation, about how it impacts the brain, about what it does, about the definition of it, and about how we can use it in some way, shape, or form, and the history of it and how it's used. So that's really good for edge play. However, and it's really good for a mindfuck, I'm going to argue that it's also a very dangerous mindfuck. We talk a lot about sticks and stones. They break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And if you look at domestic violence and the law that changed a few years ago, nowadays, anything that's said is just as abusive as anything that is done. So what we know is if we say enough, that it causes problems. I think if you're going to do a mindfuck, you have to know how to look after someone afterwards, how to repair. And they have to know how to repair. I'm a cut queen who likes humiliation. However, the reclaiming at the end, and the care for me at the end, and the I love you at the end was just and is just as important as the you fucking worthless cum dump, I'm going to use somebody else. If you don't balance it with the other things, for me personally, I don't want the damage that's going to be created by the words that we're potentially using. Especially if it talks to that child in me, and that young person, or it might be that somebody has boarding school syndrome, that it really gets to them. It might be that people are bullied in school, and it really gets to them, that we have different rituals, societies, and principles. We have to be really, really careful about that. Comparisons, and so please be careful if you're going to use humiliation. Please be careful, because it is a hell of a mindfuck. And that writing has everything you need to know about it. Have a look at it, save it, log it, write it. If you fall, it's difficult to tell someone they are not meeting your needs. And it is your responsibility to do so, right? I'm going to be an absolute cunt here. I'm really sorry that anything has happened to any of us. And believe me, I have my own history. The problem is, if we cannot tell somebody that they're not meeting our needs, if we cannot communicate how we need our needs to be met, then we need to not engage with that person in that way. We have to learn how to do it first. If we don't, then we can't be responsible and we can't work with that. And it's not fair in a BDSM situation. It doesn't work. I played with somebody who didn't want me to say things like, I didn't mean that during aftercare. What are your thoughts on that? I think if a person says to you, this is what I want and this is the way I want it, then I respect that that's the case. I would maybe get that in writing. I would maybe turn around and say, I am very aware that my form of aftercare is to give this, yours is not. So I might agree to do that for that person. However, I might also turn around and say, that is not the sort of aftercare I wish to give. I don't consent to that, therefore I don't want to pay. That's your right as well. We forget that it goes all ways. Just if that person doesn't want that sort of aftercare, we should force it on them, but it might mean that you might not want to pay because you don't feel like you have concluded or drawn a circle or kept that in some way, shape or form. I did very light humiliation because I wanted to be sure I wasn't going to hurt them. Look, with consent and everything else as well, for sure. But again, you can't fully consent. I had my hips injected last week. I haven't slept well for quite a few days. I haven't slept well for about a month before that because I knew that my bursa needed injecting again. And it's been about 19, 20 months, maybe 2 years since I've had them done. I didn't know being punched in my hips as a fucking 20-something-year-old who's into kink and alternatives would split my bursa and cause me hip problems for the rest of my life. I had no fucking idea. Even if I was a doctor, I wouldn't know that. There's no way I would know that shit. And we don't know what words and other things will do to somebody long term either. We do know that bullying, harassment, humiliation, and words that are abusive and hurtful cause long term damage in human beings. Some of us want to reclaim them and own that and be okay with it. And we still have to be aware that we might potentially be causing damage. And I'm still going to come back to what Copa family said. Even if we do all of these things, there are some games we should then not get involved in because we have to be really responsible for ourselves. And I was written to a while ago where somebody said, I've had this awful situation, this person sexually assaulted me. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And they went on to explain what had happened. And basically what happens is, through no fault of anybody's, a situation had happened in the scene that they were doing. The top asked this person for something. That put this person into little space. The top had no idea that this person had gone into little space. This person didn't communicate that they were in little space. And because they still ended up having sex because this person kind of froze, but didn't stop. And no words were said. So this person had said, well, you raped me. And this person said, no, I didn't. It was your responsibility to say it. What that was a clusterfuck. And I've written about clusterfuck scenes before. It's a clusterfuck. There's no assault. There's no intent. It was a fucking awful experience for everybody involved. It was absolutely horrific as far as I can see. If we gain consent through manipulation, if we gain consent through lying and different things, that's a completely different kettle of fish. So we just have to be very careful because we don't know where someone's going to go in their mind. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know. So this stuff is edge play. It is dangerous. We've got 5 minutes. Anyone want to ask a question about any form of mindfuck or anything that I've gone through at all? I feel like I've put so much into this hour and 15 minutes already. Fucking hell. There's quite a lot there. I remember there were lots of techniques at the beginning of ways to do things, and playing with fear, playing with light, playing with dark, manipulating is really good. Playing with different temperatures, playing with recordings and different things that we can do. Someone's environment, it all really matters. But key, if you want to do a good mindfuck, is know what fucks up the person, but also know the damage that might create. We've got to be very careful. So anybody got a question before we end? I mean, Love Island's on in a minute, and it is the cinema one, and I really want to fucking see it. How do you stop being reactive with bad mindfucks like gaslighting? So gaslighting isn't a mindfuck. Gaslighting is abuse, right? So let's define gaslighting. What does it mean? It comes from a very old play. Gaslighting is the intent to manipulate somebody in order to make them feel like they're going mad. And Fanny by Gaslight, when you look at the original play, it was all about somebody who was trying to make someone feel absolutely mad because she was an heiress.
Jump in there, it's not Fanny by Gaslight. Fanny by Gaslight is a different thing.
Oh, is it?
So it's Gaslight and the Israeli.
Sorry, thank you very much. It's just Gaslight. Thank you very much. I keep thinking of my grandma. My grandma's name was actually Fanny, so thank you very much for correcting me. Always put the two together, and I don't fucking know why. I always do that every single time, and everybody corrects me, so I hugely apologise. P.S. I have a master's in psychology, and I'm good at helping people out of panic or negative emotional state. I've got an MSc in psychotherapy and psychology, and hang on though, and I've got 8 postgraduates, and I can't always do it. Fucking, you must be amazing. The person has to want to get out something. The person has to do it. No, I don't see a question there, so I'm a bit confused. I just tell me what the question is. Right, so gaslighting. How do you get out of it? If somebody is manipulating you in such a way, what we need to do is walk away. There is no other choice. It is a cut off. It is a stop. It is everything else as well. how do you stop being reactive? If somebody is really trying to hurt you, they're not being nice to you. There's a difference between preferences and boundaries in life. We might have preferences about the way we're treated. However, if something is starting to hurt us, that changes things. So Zoe, is this because it's wanted or it's not wanted? What are you saying there? Is it that somebody's still hurting you? Because the way to get away from somebody who's gaslighting is them to go fuck themselves and walk away, and that is the only choice. I've seen the term gaslighting play. Do you think people should refer to it as that? Oh God, look, if it's play and you can't make someone feel mad unless they want to feel mad. So you can call it gaslighting, but I think it takes away from gaslighting as an actual form of abuse. I think we overuse the word gaslighting, the same as we do narcissist and psychopath and all the other ones. Jesus, everyone's ex is a narcissist or a psycho at the moment. Every hugely overused words, and gaslighting is one of them. I think we have to be very careful around if you want to do optional gaslighting, how do you do it? You can't make someone feel mad. I think you can play with fear, and you can play with things to twist things and twist their reality. And we can play mind games. I think it should be called mind games. I think that's really different. What advice would you give to someone just starting out in kink who perhaps doesn't know her own strength or all dangers yet? Go slow. You know it's my favourite. Experiment with things that are completely manageable and then add to them. We look for everything to be done all at once. We want it now. We want it delivered. We want it in everything, in every way, shape, or form, because we want to experience everything. And it's the most dangerous thing we can do, especially with our minds and fucking about with this sort of stuff. So if somebody's going to go for a mind fuck, it's quite a lot. Can you take somebody just calling you a slut? I've written about moral shame around retroactive withdrawal of consent. It's such a self-mind fuck. If you have a gangbang with 20 people and then you start calling yourself a fucking whore and a slut, your own shame is getting in the way of how you felt about what you just did. It's your own mind fuck. So my advice is to go really slow and understand your strengths. I think you go to educational workshops, get to know yourself. Make sure you've got support from other friends and other people. Get to know other people. What advice can you explain more on why I seize income down? No one knows why, if my doctor's in therapist. I'm sorry if this is a sidetrack. Seizures can be disassociative fitting. I'm not saying yours is. I don't know. That's my first instinct. That when our brains are flooded with emotions and with hormones, that we disassociatively fit. That a lot of people say is epilepsy. It's not. And it's often misdiagnosed. And I've seen a lot of people with psychological trauma who get a flood of hormones and actually they've got disassociative fitting. How in a new dynamic, we want to play with humiliation and gaslighting as safely as we can. Go slow. Gaslighting, I don't know how you play with gaslighting because it's invasive. I would read that one on humiliation and I would really go slow. Start small and see how the person reacts over the next 3 to 4 days and the kind of now that they're having. That's what I would do. How does a person who isn't necessarily wired to feel normal emotions learn to see them in others? I don't always know that others are scared or uncomfortable. I'm always nice, but I really do try. If we are on the spectrum or we have neurodiversity, it is all about our algorithm, or if we have trauma, it's all about learning algorithms. It's very much about learning what emotions look like on somebody. I would look up people like Ekman, and I would look at micro expressions, and I would look at normal facial expressions and recognitions around how most people, most of the time, not all, especially neurodivergent, people respond and have responses, and that is something that we can actually learn. We can learn how to read people. So I would look up micro expressions and I would learn from Ekman as much as I can. I'm very much fighting situations. I noticed because I've had someone attempt and got close to making me feel crazy years ago, but I pick up on it quickly and I'm very reactive. I do end up cutting them off, but I can't help the reactive instantly. Then you can't, don't we know, does that person able? I hope they do. Okay, good. Otherwise that would be an inappropriate comment. So I think, God, I've got 15 messages. I'm going as quick as I can. Maybe don't write anymore. Blah, blah. So if you are fighting situations, you've got to look at what the anger gives you. So what you've got to do is learn to understand the physiological reaction you have to that first arrow. The first arrow is an ow. Your reaction when you put it out is to turn around and stab the other person with the arrow. Your power lies in what is the ow, not is the anger reaction. So if you can understand what the fear is underneath the anger, then that will give you more power in order to start to control that. So it's about experimenting, or just a little bit of how do you do that. Okay, very much right. Knowing it's educate, I need to have training to help them out of the headspace, which I have. How can we go about starting a new dynamic, trying to be safely engaged in humiliation, mind fuckery, mind games? If you're talking about going in that deep and wanting that much help, go and see somebody who is a life coach or a therapist about this, who can help you with techniques, who can teach you to read all of those things and make sure that you get, if you're going to play at that level, go and get a mentor, go and get some help and make sure they really know this stuff and read about it. But the thing is, we can read about it. The thing I do, I'm quite pluralistic in my approach when I do this sort of stuff. I know that one thing might not necessarily work. So when I'm working with somebody who is maybe having a panic attack or not okay, regardless of what I know, I need to have 20 to 30 options up my sleeve. Shock tactics can be very good if we're going to talk about global type theories. So a massive change in temperature, if someone's having a major panic attack, hands in ice cold water or face in ice cold water. But again, if you put someone's face in ice cold water and they have something like, a skin condition or eczema, you can actually cause more problems. People say, well done, thank you very much, that's very, very kind of you. There's an awesome British couple who teach play with gaslighting. Yep, I've seen that. And they're very careful to teach recovery aftercare first. I don't think we should call it gaslighting. I would like to know their qualifications to do that. That's my opinion on that. I had a client who went to a sex party on Sunday with a so-called sex therapist, and was...
Oh God, a so-called sex therapist. Oh my God.
And what really bothered me is what she shared with me today was they were doing this thing where you had to touch other people, but you had to get consent, but you had to touch the person you stopped by. And she said, but I wasn't attracted, what do I do? And then at one point something happened, and I'm not going to go into what happened, but basically the sex therapist turned around and said to her, gosh, you need to look at why you're jealous, that's a problem. Number one, she doesn't know that reaction was based on jealousy for a start. How about we're curious instead of assumptive? And she actually turned around and said to my client, I say my client very possessively, very angrily, because her actual words were, well, when I love somebody, I'm happy for them to do things with other people, and you should too. Well, she's not Polly. What if it's not her? Polly isn't better, it's different. Mono isn't better, it's different. We don't have to do anything. And I found that utterly shocking, but supposedly a sex therapist. So I have real problems with people teaching classes saying this is the way that it works. I really want to know. I really want to know what that person's qualifications are. And with these 3 or 4 things, give me another 10 when it goes wrong. Give me alternatives. So I would definitely work with someone who's qualified. Also, give me something to bring up to my doctors. I'm really glad about that. Not everyone is employed, not everyone. I know, each to their own. There is no right or wrong, but to say that the person should, that's your own shit getting in the way. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming. I'll pick a subject for the next 2 weeks, and I hope to see you all again. You've been very kind. If you are a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, you are so welcome to ask me for a CPD certificate. I don't ask for any money. I don't give a shit whether you pay or not. I do have a coffee. I do have a Patreon if you want to donate anything for the costs that are involved in this. If you don't, that's fine too. Thank you very much for coming along. Wank away. See you all very soon. And if you liked it, please do come to the next one or advertise or share.
And if you anywhere near London, you to land something week.
Yeah, I'm at Land. And that's a workshop that's live, and I never know what someone's going to say. I never know what someone's going to ask. Are you? Yay! See you at Land, and see you at Land. Lovely. Come and say hello to me if you do come along.
Good stuff, Land. Get to that.
Recording stuff.